Jesus went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he,"
Here we are again at another meal. Jesus didn't even wash his feet to get the dirt off. Then he lowered himself like a slave and washed all of our feet. How humiliating. He's supposed to be the rabbi and know better. How can he demean himself? He eats with all sorts of unclean people. Like that tax collector over there, and those dumb fishermen, and the woman. Let me tell you about the women. He has all sorts of women following him, paying money to support him. I know because I keep the purse. Look at his shameful relationship with Martha and Mary. Shameful. And he allowed that woman in who spread that costly ointment on him. I could have spent that money on the poor. Of course I would take my cut. I deserve to live better than these. I follow all the rules of cleanliness. Jesus is always talking about God's justice, but I would just like a little bit of good punishment for those who break purity, like working on the Sabbath or healing the lepers. Can't you see they sinned? Evil is all around us in this world. No one listens to the priests anymore. You can see evil's hand on the hearts of the people. Caesar controls all our thoughts and actions. Why doesn't Jesus respond with force? He has done many miracles. Can't he do the big one? Throw off the oppression of Caesar? God will protect him. Maybe he just needs a little push. If I go to the priests and turn him over to them, he will have to protect himself. Violence is the only way to take back our country. Fear is all around me in the world. How can I follow Jesus? He keeps expecting me to go into the unknown, where I'm not in control, where I am expected to love those different from me, especially the poor and the people of different faiths and different colors. They do not deserve love. I can always say Satan made me do it. It's not my fault. I don't know what possessed me. He made me do it. I had no control. But Jesus wants trust. How can I trust when Jesus is leading me to the cross? Didn't he pick me up when I was in that situation that I couldn't get out of? Didn't he listen to me when that problem became so strong for me to handle? How can I leave him now? But I must. I don't want to die on the cross. I don't want to die. The priests will protect me if I turn him over. I don't want to die. I'm afraid. Afraid. Afraid.
when Jesus said to them, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First, they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them and warming himself. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about the disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me?" Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, the cock crowed.
I love Peter. Of course, I love Peter. I'm a therapist, and Peter is one emotionally complex disciple. I love Peter because he is us. In all his emotional messiness, he is us, and we are him. Earlier in the gospel, we see Peter refusing to have his feet washed by Jesus, and then asking not only for his feet, but his hands and head to be washed. Peter had a need to feel connected, loved, and seen by Jesus. In the Passion, Peter is filled with rage and maybe bravery, cutting off the high priest's servant's ear. And in denying Jesus 3 times after that, shows just how human he could be, allowing fear to drive his behavior. Perhaps he then felt shame. Jesus called Peter the rock. He is a bit of a rockhead, on which the church would be built. Jesus is saying the church will be built on humanity, on us, messy, imperfect, and strangely beautiful. Jesus loved Peter in his imperfection. He trusted him in his imperfection. We are Peter.
Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was a bandit. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God." Now, when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Then he handed him over to them to be crucified.
What does the perspective of Pilate have to teach us today? Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea. He was not a man that would be admired by the standards of our culture, and he is not to be viewed as a hapless victim of circumstance. His actions seem to be those of a man charged with responsibility who wants a pesky problem to go away. The reading fulfills a number of elements of prophecy. Jesus invokes the powerful phrase, "I am," 3 times. Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Pilate acquits Jesus 3 times. In the end, the priests still clamor for the execution of Jesus, but it requires Pilate's authority to do so. While Jesus was arrested by what we think of as religious police and taken to the priests acknowledged that they did not have the authority to execute Jesus. They had to take him to the civil authority, Pilate. Pilate appears to not want any part of this religious squabble. He even accommodates the priests by coming out of his palace to address them because they are preparing for Passover, and entering the palace would make them ritually unclean. Pilate seems to want all of this to go away so he can continue to collect taxes and keep these troublesome people from attracting the attention of the powers in Rome. But he cannot find a reason that compels the execution of Jesus. Eventually, he gives in to keep the locals from exploding, but he has a price in mind that they will pay. He directs that a sign identifying Jesus as King of the Jews be displayed on his cross. This is a bitter pill for those calling for the execution, but they will swallow it to get their way. So what does the perspective of Pilate teach us today? There is a church that holds that he became a Christian based on his reluctance to execute Jesus. For the most part, Pilate faded from history, except for this record of interaction with Jesus. We believe he was sent back to Rome to answer to the emperor for violently suppressing a different religious uprising, but the emperor died before Pilate arrived to his fate. Was Pilate a villain? A coward? A bureaucrat? Probably all of these. Maybe his perspective teaches us that everything is part of something larger.
So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. Pilate also had an inscription written and put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. Then the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and divided them into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic. Now the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from the top. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see who will get it." This was to fulfill the scripture that says, "They divided my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots." And that is what the soldiers did. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene.
What did the women at the foot of the cross think that day? Were they lost in grief as they witnessed the crucifixion? Were they wondering why God would allow this to happen? Are they so different than us? As we watch the news, we become witness to tragedies, and we wonder this same thing. Why is God allowing this to happen? Why has the darkness found its way into our lives? I hope the women didn't wonder about any of those questions at all. I hope that despite their grief, they were waiting patiently for God to make the next move, because that is what faith is about, reminding yourself in the dark that a new day is coming.
When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her into his own home. After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Since it was the day of preparation, and the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because that Sabbath was a day of great solemnity, so they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified, so that you also may believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. These things occurred so that the scriptures might be fulfilled. None of his bones shall be broken. And again, in another passage of scripture says, they will look on the one whom they have pierced. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed his body. Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.
Webster defines privilege as a right or immunity granted as a peculiar benefit, advantage, or favor, prerogative. Privilege is granted. If it is granted, it can be taken away. The first time we heard the name Nicodemus is when he came to Jesus by night. He wanted Jesus to know that he and others believed he was sent from God. Now, I don't think Jesus was all that thrilled that Nicodemus snuck in for a visit under the protection of darkness. Jesus isn't really a work-in-the-shadows kind of guy. Jesus made this clear to the high priest when he said, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the people come together. I have said nothing in secret." Jesus did everything in plain sight, and in doing so, he had everything to lose. Nicodemus came to see Jesus at night because he had privilege. The powers that be had granted Nicodemus rights and immunities as a peculiar benefit, advantage, or favor, and he did not want to risk losing the privileges that made his status higher and life easier. The grief from death has a way of changing us, and now the lifeless body of Jesus is hanging on the cross. Joseph of Arimathea possessed power and privilege, and apparently a lot of it. He went to Pontius Pilate and asked to take away the body of Jesus. Nothing quite says you are willing to risk losing your status, power, and privilege than publicly taking Jesus' body down off the cross, ritually preparing it, and laying it in a tomb. It appears Nicodemus was willing to take the risk as well. What is your status when it comes to privilege? What rights or immunities have been granted as peculiar benefits, advantages, or favors to you? You certainly have them. Is it time to step out of the shadows and take the risk? Are you willing to use your privileges for the sake of the gospel? Are you willing to risk losing them to do the right thing and heal the world?